I'm Bryan Hyde, and I'm telling it like it is.
Looks like there's a storm coming. Well, figuratively, there's a storm coming. 5 bills, no less than 5 bills are before the Utah legislature at this time regarding land use, particularly federal lands. This is a battle that's been shaping up for a long, long time, but specifically what these bills seek to do is to compel the federal government to give up the public lands that it said it would 116 years ago when the state of Utah became a state and by an enabling act was admitted into the Union. See, part of the language of that enabling act said that the state, those lands that were held by the federal government would be held in trust, but they would be returned to the state in a timely fashion. Well, here it is 116 years later, and it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. So state legislators are actually telling the federal government it's time to pony up, or they're threatening legal action. Now, this is getting mixed reactions on both sides of the aisle. Environmentalists are absolutely up in arms. They're sure that the second that land transfers to private hands or into state hands, there will be a strip mine on every square mile, mud puddles, maybe with oil or coal left and decomposing bodies. It's the worst case scenario ever. On the other hand, there's concern among many on the conservative side of the aisle saying that, if we don't do this, we're going to find ourselves locked out of all of these lands and unable to enjoy them. The truth is somewhere in the middle, but this much is sure. This would not be an issue except for the larger issue of the relationship between the state and the federal government. That is the root cause of this conflict. And in one way or another, this could very well ask the larger question, what's the proper relationship between the states and our national government? Let's go back to the beginning. The states created a federal government, and there's a difference between federal and national. Here's the difference. Following the Revolutionary War, the Treaty of Paris signed in 1783, King George, when he was acknowledging the cessation of hostilities, he didn't say the United States of America. He listed each individual state, because each individual state was, in effect, its own little country. It was sovereign, it was a little republic, and he mentioned all 13 of them by name. Under the Articles of Confederation, Section 2 of the Articles specified those states retain their individuality and retain their sovereignty. And with the creation of the Constitution, what the states did was they created a federal government. In other words, they created a central government with very few, very specified duties that would serve as a gathering place for the common interests of those states: foreign policy, national defense, and regulating commerce between the several states. But they retained their sovereignty. Those powers were delegated. They were not transferred. And you can't create something that is greater than yourself. Do you get the picture? The federal government was supposed to be the servant of the states. Well, there was a consolidationist point of view that started with Alexander Hamilton and it carried out all the way through Abraham Lincoln when the entire situation was tipped on its head following the war between the states. That's when we made the transition from a federal government where the states have the majority of the power and they delegate just a few common areas of power to the federal government to a national government. The big government, everything is centralized, what it says goes. In other words, the states became administrative offices to that federal government. And that's where we are today. Increasingly, the federal government tells the states when to jump, how high, and how much it's going to cost them. And the states really have very little recourse because the federal courts predictably have upheld this time and time again. Well, it looks like we may be seeing a return to questioning the original relationship between the states, the federal government acting as a servant of the states rather than their master. If it takes a land use issue to do that, I'd say it's about time. But one thing's for sure, more freedom could be found on the other side of how that question is answered, or we could find ourselves with a corresponding continued loss of freedom. Sounds like something that we'd all be better off to get more informed about. Would you agree? I'm Bryan Hyde. I'm telling it like it is.